Good afternoon, everybody. What a great panel, and we're so lucky at this conference to have such super panelists and to learn from them. So we're going to go from one excellent panel to another. My name is Valerie Helberner, and I'm a partner at the law firm Torys. Thanks so much to the FNMPC team for having us again this year. This really has become an annual gathering spot for really impactful and important conversations, and we're so honored to be a part of that. At Torys, we work on major projects across the country, and one of the things we see consistently is that how decisions get made matters as much as what gets decided. And this next panel is exactly about that, specifically what it looks like when nations are integral to setting the terms, applying their own legal frameworks, and sharing in decision-making grounded in their responsibilities to land and to community. When that happens, the outcomes are different. There are clearer pathways for nations, companies, and investors alike. It's a pivotal time for this work, and I'm so glad to be that this is being discussed in a room like this one. I'm really looking forward to hearing the upcoming conversation. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our next group of panelists. Chief Ian Campbell is Hereditary Chief of the Squamish Nation. Wilson Williams is Council Chairperson of the Squamish Nation. And Luke Schauerte is President and CEO of Woodfibre LNG. And our moderator for this next panel is Kimberly Lavoie of the Qalipu First Nation, and she's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Natural Resources Canada. So please join me in welcoming our next group of panelists.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. As Valerie said, my name is Kimberly Lavoie. I'm from the Qalipu First Nation Mi'kmaq community in Newfoundland, and I am joined by esteemed panelists here today, both from the Squamish Nation and representing Woodfibre LNG. And we don't have a lot of time, so we're just going to dive into things because that's kind of how I roll. So my first question is for folks from the Squamish Nation. And so what made you decide to do your own environmental assessment process? Like, no one told you that you could do it, and you took it upon yourselves. And obviously it was something that was important with you, but how did you work with Woodfibre LNG during this process? Like, how did it come into being?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, first off, so good to be here. The next 7 generations and our future. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yes, great question. I think when we look at historically and, through time and reclamation, reconciliation, and the strength and the independence that's coming back to our Indigenous peoples throughout the country, we looked at, the provincial and federal government environmental assessment processes, and there was challenges that we had. It didn't reflect our values and everything that we represented historically. So we had challenges there, and it came about through discussion. And I really hold my hands up to Sekyu, Chief Ian here, was one of the originators before I got on council, and he did a lot of good work there in regards to identifying what are our exact challenges with the federal and provincial government's environmental assessment, but also really leading by who we are and where we come from as what we say Squamish people, our identity, but all Indigenous people in regards to being valued in respect to protecting the environment and protecting our sacred cultural sites and really protecting the integrity of our identity.
Thank you. Chief Ian.
Yeah, just to build, thank you for having us. And as Sxwíxwtn mentioned, to be honest, the NEB process on Trans Mountain was a real big catalyst for us because we were quite dismayed that Squamish really wasn't heard in that process, that it was more of a tick the boxes in the regulatory process where we had fundamental concerns around extirpation of orcas, for example, or how to clean up an oil spill. Things like this that required further analysis to incorporate our concerns. So when Woodfibre came along, we didn't want to replicate the same experience we had through the NEB, and we opted to exercise a consent-based model where there was a start and a finish based on Indigenous science as well as Western science. As Sxwíxwtn mentioned, it was really about the environment, as we've seen the revitalization of Atlakatsum, known as Howe Sound, with the return of herring biomass after decades of absence, return of cetaceans like orcas and other whales. We wanted to really measure a new entrant in the market, such as this export facility, being compatible with our environmental, cultural, and spiritual values. And that's what led to us opting to exercise our authority and jurisdiction by conducting our own independent environmental assessment. We then issued 25 legally binding conditions, which built a solid relationship with our partners.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So Luke, maybe over to you. You know, there's obvious benefits to a partnership, but take me back to that moment when you thought that an Indigenous-led environmental assessment was a good thing. You know, this is not something that I think intuitively industry gravitates towards, but how did you establish that partnership? How did you opt for a different approach in this particular instance, and what led you there?
Thanks. So, Tano Yop, Luke Schauerte, Quiansna, Amanox Tan Squalin. I'm really privileged to be here with Siyam and Siyam today. I think this demonstrates the partnership we've built and the enduring commitment we have to each other. I wasn't there at the start. I think, you know, obviously, Chief Ian was, and I know they're a little bit younger, so maybe I just came in a little bit later. But I think the foundations that were set live and thrive in the company today. So there was a view of this is how we do business in a good way. It was very much a company view that if you start with this relationship in mind, and I would give a shout out to previous Chief Counsellor of the Heist Nation, Crystal Smith, who said, you know, you have to build a relationship before you build a project. And I think that foundation held true here. So we said, look, we have a foundation, we have this relationship, we need to codify it. We need to figure out a way to actually ensure that for the years to come, we'll know how we work together, what we value together, how we're going to solve problems together. And that codification turned into the SNIA. And now I see it every day. So, you know, whether we're dealing with small challenges and opportunities to figure out how to do something better, or whether we're dealing with big structural challenges to say, how are you going to do this for the first time? It's made the project better. You have better environmental outcomes in terms of those results, and you have that through the merging of traditional knowledge and Western science and saying, what's the right way to go forward? How do you protect the fish? How do you protect the mammals? How do you protect the sound? How do you actually make sure that Sxwíxwtn is left better because of it? And you see that in the work that's been done in the Gender Safety Committee and the associated protections for people to make sure that the community thrives, that the environment thrives, and that this relationship turns into an economic expression that actually goes forward well. I think that by doing that work right at the start, you actually set the trajectory, I think you say the direction of the canoe, to be sure that we're getting through regulatory processes more efficiently because ourselves and the nation are aligned. And then we can move through all the other levels of government to be sure that those values are held true. So I think that it's definitely a situation where people felt apprehensive doing something new, but it's ultimately made for a better project and a better outcome for our company.
Wonderful. And with respect to the 25 binding conditions, like how did you respond to that? How did you take those on?
So a lot of that was work, and I'll let Siyam add on. There's fundamental technical work that was done. So we looked at, I'll give you an example. There was a discussion about should it be air-cooled or water-cooled. There was a lot of concerns about saying if you go with water cooling, it has an impact on Akatsum. Do we actually understand that? And do we understand what the new technology in air cooling is? So the technical work was done. It was presented and done in conjunction with Squamish Nation regulatory teams. They went through those studies and came forward and said, look, actually your request to explore air cooling makes sense. And ultimately took that technology on, took that change on. So you've seen that sort of through those conditions becoming part of how the project emerged to be sure that those values were actually put forward and embodied in the work that we've done. And that's where you get to a net zero first production facility. That's where you get to air cooling. I could go down the list. But the big ones that hit my heart are the gender safety and culture, making sure that it's a safe environment for women and First Nations people to work and to want to come and experience it.
Wonderful, thank you. Did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the conditions really stemmed from our engagement with our community where we went into deep consultation for about 2 or 3 years to really look at, again, compatibility of a new entrant like export facilities in our territory. where our community really articulated, their concerns around, seawater cooling, as Luke mentioned, around electrification of the project, avoiding sensitive habitat like the Squamish River estuary through directional drilling, removing compressor stations that were in proximity to our inhabited reserves where there's significant anxiety amongst our membership, even though probability is low, consequence is high of any sort of combustion. So mitigating all of these perceived risks along with the flotel to then sort of bring the workers on site and somewhat contain them so that there's no impact on the local rental market, things like that. We wanted to be cognizant of, not only environmental conditions, but social and economic. And that stemmed from, deep listening to our members.
Yeah, and just to add as well, when we look above and beyond, we've created this mutual respect, and I think we found that from the outset. And I was newly elected at the time and really just kind of grinding in the books in regards to getting up to date with the comprehension of this project. And in saying that, though, respectively, finding that mutual respect has brought us closer together in a good way and through good leadership and governance. And, really, as Indigenous people, we come in rooms and, through intergenerational trauma or whatever you want to reflect upon is we come with our guard up, and we say, why is someone here? Are they here to take something away? But in this case, we built that trust, we built that respect, the mutual respect, most importantly, to be able to come in a room comfortably. When Chief Ian mentioned we consulted our people, when we're in a community, we're walking with our people to say this is an initiative that has come to, that our leaders have come to with, as a regulator and partner to move forward. So it sounds like it's overnight, but it wasn't. It was a long journey, but we did it together with our people. And it came with opposition, it came with challenges. But when we look and flip the page to today, it's flourishing. But above and beyond the partnership, we've cleaned up the house sound in a way that's never been done before. And I always look at Chief Ian and in council yelling, we got to protect the environment, we got to do this. But, we took out thousands and thousands of carousel piles and cleaned up the house sound. And when we say we got sea life back, we really do. The heron's back. Whales are coming, so there's people up on the mountain want to watch whales. But life is back in the ecosystem that our people have witnessed and flourished and lived for so many generations. So you can imagine the emotions with some of our elders that kind of carry that oral history, but have lived it as well.
And I think that's an incredible, incredible piece to this story because you don't normally associate an LNG project with improved environmental outcomes. It's not something that tends to be talked about hand in hand. Yeah. Yet here in this project, and I've heard it from community members as well that traditional herring and with the cedar boughs that you haven't been able to do that for decades.
For years.
Right? For decades. And so the fact that this project allowed that to happen is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it does speak to the partnership that you have together. And so, building upon that, from the outside looking in, it seems as though both groups would be approaching this project from very opposite ends of the spectrum. And that, finding middle ground would be very, very difficult. And from what I'm hearing from you, there is a lot more alignment than what people originally assumed. So could I ask everybody, each of our panelists, to speak to how you were able to kind of bridge the gap, to work together, to find that common ground that's mutually beneficial for all? Because that's the sweet spot that everybody is looking for, but is often very, very nebulous and hard to find. Someone has to start.
Well, I think for me, speaking of consent, it shouldn't be a scary word to government or industry. Consent isn't something where, I've heard other governments frame as veto. Right now, the Cabinet of Canada has veto, and Indigenous peoples haven't been able to participate in previous projects within our territory that are encumbrances, that have impacted our economic sovereignty, our food sovereignty, our cultural and spiritual values. So to reframe that relationship, and look at a path forward, the nation was very proactive, and we can't take credit for this here because it's generations of effort to get to where we are. And land use planning was really important to us to remove ambiguity on how we want to see our lands being developed, where we protected 8% of our territory as conservancies, meaning 92% is open for business as long as it meets our values and our metrics. So we're not assimilated and we're not just adopting Western culture, it's bringing the two together, and that's really about collaboration. It's about recognizing our authority and our jurisdiction, but also bringing us in as partners and value that translates into real opportunities for our members with long-term careers and procurement business communities that can then flourish. We're also working on power engineers to be part of the operations of the project for the next 40 years, where a lot of our youth, they want to not assimilate and give up our identity and our values and our relationship to our territories and to each other to be successful in a project like LNG. It's really bringing those two together, and that's something that the relationship, I think, was really integral to work with an international company like Royal Golden Eagle to see that value proposition that, again, we're creating certainty, we're creating stability, we're attracting investment, and we're getting the job done.
Yeah, I'll just reflect on, something we celebrate today, and I think it's going to be well celebrated in the future. The Squamish Nation Environmental Assessment Agreement is a document that, really speaks volumes of us integrating this relationship and really regulating where we're going. And, because our people were part of it. And you bring in that history, you bring in that kind of knowledge to the table, and there's something real there. We have some of our hereditary chiefs in the room that really done great work, some who are not with us today, but really just left that legacy to this project and, really uniting our people. We have many people flourishing on the project today, but we're in a position of strength because we created the Environmental Assessment Agreement, and it's the first of its kind.
It is.
So when we look at that and really, with our guards down but proud, but, when we look at the future, what does that look like 10, 20 years from now? How is that relationship going to be, being roommates with Luke and trying to, wear his clothes. No, I'm joking. But, really kind of find that place of respect. How is that going to, I'm in a position now as elected chairperson of our nation with 13 out of 16 being brand new to the table. It's an education journey because they're coming with a guard up. And, I really respect some of our elders around the table, but as chair, there's really a strategy to educate. It's the same way we engaged our people, to really meaningfully connect, but also share factual information and how we got here. It's kind of reflecting on who you are and where you come from, really determines where you go.
It's pretty awesome. Luke?
Yeah, I think I can see where from the outside looking in, it would look like there was a lot of divergence.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of industry and a lot of time in industry where consent was, like you said, Siyam it was a checkbox. It was a one-time exercise. I think that when you actually are inside the company and ultimately the people, and if I get down to the tables that we sit at with Squamish Nation, either regulators or in partnership, you have people who are bound by this codified way of working. And so you give them a framework to say, we have to resolve this. It's been decided that we're going to go forward, so how do we do that? And I think that collaborative, sometimes challenging environment allows for better outcomes. So I think from the outside looking in, it's that there was always a unified view. We're going to do this, and we're going to do it in this way. And I think that was given to us by the people that actually sat at that table and ground that out. But it's been lived every day since. So I think from the outside looking in, you could say that I could delay my engagement with the First Nation that I intend to work with, and I can let the system drive the outcome. And I just don't think that's how business is done in Canada anymore. And it's certainly, this is a bellwether for what's possible. But I think if you do that hard work up front and you make it an everyday obligation on everybody that's involved to see how do we make a better project, How do we actually increase and raise the bar on environmental standards? How do we raise the bar on gender safety? How do we raise the bar on employment opportunities? If you're interested in that, if you're both committed to that, then better outcomes are a natural byproduct, and you see from the outside in that there's solutions.
Wonderful. And so we're short on time, so maybe if each of you could give me like a quick answer on the fear. So there's fear that if it's an Indigenous-led process, there's fear around consent. The word consent scares people. There's fear that it's going to take a long time and that projects are going to be delayed. And there's fear that maybe like it'll just stop dead in its tracks. How do you, like, what can you tell the audience to help them kind of get beyond that fear and to be able to move forward in this space in a proactive way?
Yeah, I think that, speaking of that fear is kind of like when I referenced the guard up, when we look where we're at today, we're telling our story. What's our story with this project, with this initiative that started a long time ago? We say not to Sxwíxwtn and long ago, where all our Indigenous peoples are here to protect the land, the waters, the environment. We want to leave things how we found it. But there's a lot of industry out there that have impacted the environment and our lands, where now we kind of integrate this into a project like this with leading conditions to, now if we're going to look at eliminating or mitigating fear is us being here today. I specifically wanted to be here to share this story and help empower other Indigenous people and leaders and the private sector on this is a success story. We're about to take another leap in a positive direction, not just for our people, but for the economy. And the challenges we're facing in the world today, this is an example. We gotta pave a stronger future in how we're gonna manage wealth in the future. We are challenged in our communities when we look in our backyard with, poverty and health issues, substance abuse. When we look at these things, this wealth is gonna be help manage, get our community to that next level. But saying that, going back to conditions, it's compliance, it's implementation. I'll share one quick story around getting a call with Kathleen, who's here straight from Vancouver. We got a call on stopping the project one day because some of our assessment that was done, that wasn't fully meeting one of the conditions. So they stopped the project for a day or so and make sure they mitigated that, and then we continued. Yeah. But the communication was there. Instead of us being reactive, there was that mutual respect of saying, hey, that we got to contact the nation and the team, and kind of like that healthy relationship is there.
Appreciate that. So not a lot of time,
I'll
but if we could hear quickly.
I'll go quick because I know it'll take a long time for Xalek. So just quickly, if a small company like Woodfibre with a powerful nation like Squamish Nation in a UN biosphere and Atkat Sum can do this, it's doable by everybody else. So I absolutely subscribe to Sxwíxwtn's view that because of this moment, because of having the opportunity to share with everybody in the room, if it inspires you just one bit, then to me that's enough to say that this is all possible and it's done and we're happy to share.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is there's a lot of anxiety right now in society around stability, economy, affordability, UNDRIP, case law, Indian Act, Section 35, title. There's so many things that are complex in our relationships. This is a beacon that allows us to look at how to get a major project to fruition through partnership. And the fear in my mind as a negotiator on the project is the onus falls on the nation to then act accordingly. If you're going to position yourself as a regulator, you then need to structure your governance for stability and structure your economic development arms and mobilize your people to build those regimes to then occupy the field. And that's a framework, and it takes time. It's incremental, and it's step by step. It's not a magic wand where we say, we are now a regulator, but we can collaborate with other regulators, and we could start to build that together. And that, to me, is of value to all of us as Canadians.
Thank you so much. So you heard it here first, folks. Relationship, mutual respect, take the time, have the hard conversations, and realize that the path forward is the path that you're walking together. So thank you so much to all of you. Walalan, from the bottom of my heart. And please, let's give them a hand.